to thank you all for coming tonight. This is part of the National Week of Remembrance that was established by Congress and led by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. If you ever had a chance to go there, you know it's a wonderful museum and they do wonderful things. And so for this week, I really wanted to do something to commemorate, and after much searching, I found Mrs. Heller, and she's traveled all the way from Greenville tonight to come speak with us and share her story. And I really hope that you take this inside you so that you don't forget, because we are getting further and further away from it, and I think a lot of people are tending to forget that it did happen, and that way it doesn't happen. And a couple of you saw the introductory video talking about the Holocaust that has happened more recently, and unfortunately there's evil people out there, and we need to try to do what we can. So y'all give me a warm welcome to Mrs. Heller.
Thank you for coming out. I don't know if any of you know, my husband was Max Heller, who was mayor of Greenville. And how we got here is a miracle, and that we're alive is a miracle, and that's why I like to tell people about it, because I also speak about love. If everybody loved, this would never happen. Hate brings hate. How this happened to the Germans, nobody knows. Nobody knows how they could kill 11 million people. I don't know if you're aware of that 11 million people were killed. All the 6 million Jews, all the people that couldn't help themselves, all the gay people, all the people who didn't like him, and it amounted to 11 million people. We hear about 100,000, 200,000, which is horrible. But when you think about this number, nobody really realizes it anymore. I would love for you to ask me questions whenever you think of it. Just raise your hands, and if I can, I will answer it. I don't know everything. I'm a very lucky person. I was an only child. Very doted on, and I was 15 years old going to school, and my parents took care of me beautifully. We were not rich, we were comfortable. I lived in a 3-story walk-up apartment my parents bought when they got married and put in bathrooms and all that. And I had many animals because I was an only child. I even had 2 porcupines. And I had a dog, and I had 2 canaries, and I had a lovebird, and I had a dog, and because I was an only child. Right now I have 18 great-grandchildren, because my husband always said we have to replace that we lost 90 people to Hitler, and I always said I can't do 90. But so far we're over 40 that are still alive, so that is wonderful. And the 18th great-grandchild is on the way, which is wonderful too. And they include me in everything, even though I live in Greenville all by myself. They all live all over. But my kids come so much that I wake up in the morning and don't remember if anybody's sleeping in the other room. They're wonderful. We are a very tight family. If you have seen my husband's statue on Main Street, then you know something about him. He loved Greenville. I'll tell you how we got here, which is a fantastic story. And remember to ask me questions when you think of them, because then you'll forget later. I grew up and I went to school. I went to a school of commerce from 14 up, and I was my first year of that school because my parents had 2 stores, and the stores were supplying things for tailors. Most men did not buy their suits ready-made in Vienna. They had them made to order. And my parents sold all the things that came in a suit, which I think were $49 or something like that. And they had 2 little stores, and my mother always had somebody to stay with me when she was gone, but she was also a fantastic cook and baker and mother and father. My father was a really wonderful father too. And I was going to the city of Vienna, in the inside city, to a gym class. I was always fighting weight. I'd been a dancer until I was 10. I was actually a good dancer. I gave evenings for charity even by myself. But then one of my grandmothers who lived in Poland said, no grandchild of mine will be a professional dancer. And my father heeded his mother, and I stopped dancing and got big. And I was going to a gym class in the city, a 1-hour gym class, and it was 2 days before Austria was supposed to vote whether they wanted to be part of Germany. And they were all yelling in the streets for their parties. There was not one German sign. I can't even say the word for it. There wasn't one swastika that I saw, not one. There were the 3 arrows and the Christian socialists and even all kinds of. I was in an hour class. When I came out, the entire city was full of Germans. They were marching at the border. Every policeman had on a swastika. Every building had a swastika. So you can imagine, as a kid of 15, when I saw that, I was not into politics. I didn't know what was happening. I went home, and my parents came home, and they said, what are we going to do? Well, Austria would not let us out without a permit. Any other country wouldn't let us in without a permit. So we were stuck. My father loved his car. He always had a car. And the weekend he was lying under it, whether it needed it or not. That's how much he loved it. And we used to go to other countries for every holiday, for every 2 days off, because countries are small in Europe. And so my father said, we're going to leave. We have our passports. And my mother says, what do you mean leave? Everything we have is here in Vienna. Where are we going? We have no place to go. And we're not allowed to get in or out of the border. So we didn't leave, which was a big mistake. 2 days later, there was a knock on our door on the 3rd floor with the butt of a rifle. And all the man said to me when I opened the door is, car keys. And I handed over the car keys. Imagine somebody coming to your door and saying car keys. You'd think they're crazy. But we had to hand it over or die. And then we didn't know what to do. I went to school the next day, but nobody would speak to me. No teacher would speak to me. I was completely ostracized because I was Jewish. And I went home never to go back to school, ever. I still miss it terribly. We tried to educate ourselves, but it's not the same. My children all have many degrees. I saw to that. But my husband and I weren't allowed to go back to school. And he did okay, even though, I think. He got 4 doctorates, I only got 1. But, so we didn't know what to do, right? So we sort of figured out what can we do, how can we survive. I had no idea how bad it was, luckily at that moment, but I learned fast. They took me out of our apartment. They took my mother and me to go wash a place where there were some Hebrew signs. We had to scour it. But what they did is that the worst Nazis, who were the teenagers who had brown shirts, they took all the people out of there and left me and surrounded me. And I thought that was the end of me. But 2 German officers came in and stopped the whole thing. I want you to know we survived because of so many miracles, and they were miracles. My husband used to say, I believe in miracles, I just don't depend on them. But we survived because of miracles. I was saved. I cried 2 days and 2 nights and had a doctor give me a shot to stop it. It was that close. And there was nobody there really to help me. But these officers were from a different ilk than the Nazis, and they saved me. Then we started to look around to see how could we get out of here. So then came, if you've heard of Kristallnacht, Crystal Night. Before that though, a couple and a man came to our door, and my parents had bought that apartment before they were married and put in bathrooms. It was an old building. And this man came with this couple, and he said to them, is this the place you want? And they said, yes. And he said, you're out in 6 hours or you die. Just imagine yourself doing that. So we started to pack boxes, and my father found a place like a ghetto of old apartments, and we moved there. And then Kristallnacht came, Crystal Night came, and we didn't know it. We were not born. It was the German attaché outside of Austria found out that his parents were killed. So he killed a German man. And Hitler gave the people 36 hours to do as they wanted. You can do anything you want with them. So we still had one little store open, and one of my friends helped there. He was there. He opened up, and Kristallnacht started. And my father had just left to go to the store when my girlfriend called me and said, don't let your father leave, and hung up. Well, we didn't know it was happening. So he came back. He said the man that arrested him knew him, and he said to him, please let me tell my wife, I'll probably never see them again. He said, okay, I'll be right here when you come back. So when he came and told us he was arrested, my mother made him put on warm underwear and stuff because we didn't think we'd ever see him again. He was going to a camp. The reason, another miracle that we survived is, at that time there were only gas chambers for men and places for men and not for women, because Austria was early on in his taking over countries. I think he would have taken over the world if it hadn't been the American soldiers and others like that, because there was nobody stopping him. People followed him like he was God, really. I get a question in every school. The first question is, did you meet Hitler? I said, I wouldn't be here. You know. People don't realize what that means even. No questions yet? I'm happy to answer questions. Yes.
How did it make you feel, or what were your beliefs before and after the Holocaust? Like in God, did you stop believing you believe more in God?
The same,
The same.
yes. I was born a certain way, I'll die a certain way. Unfortunately, this all was man-made. And I did not lose my belief in men either, only in some men. When I went back, I only spoke to people in German of certain age, not the ones my age. But I'm not like them, so I don't want to be like them. And I wanted to live my life happily. And my thing that I always teach children is love. Love, my whole family lives by the way you call into the echo, so the echo calls back. And since I've been teaching that, I've had a lot of people come back and say, I've tried it, it really works. And my children do it, and they call me and say, I did an echo today. And unfortunately, they taught hate. Everything was hate. And why, I don't know. I don't know how people can live with hate. Because hate comes back, you know. So I tell the children, have a lot of love for your people, for all people. And that's how I like to live, and it's worked for me very well. I had a wonderful life after. So when my father came back, my mother called a neighbor, and she hid him in the closet. And when they came for my father to rearrest him, my mother said he left. The woman had a son who was mentally not able, and they took him away, but they brought him back. At that time, they had not enough places to kill people. They thought nothing of killing people. I mean, I hate to tell it, there's young kids here. I had an aunt who had 3 little girls, and they took them by the feet and smashed their heads against a tree in front of her. And you wonder what kind of human beings are these? Where did they come from? People don't realize that. The nicest people I knew turned against us. We became outcasts. I was afraid to go in the street and had no place to go. But after this, I went downstairs when they saved my father in the closet next door, and I got a cab. And talk about the cab driver, he did not give us away. He was one of the most wonderful people. My father laid down in the back of the cab, and we went to the little store we had, and we had this iron curtain we put down, and we stayed there 36 hours. We had no food, we had no bathroom, but that didn't matter. And a friend of mine was there helping us out, and we told ghost stories all night, you know, and we were kids. And we survived. Again, another miracle. And he survived, which was a miracle too, because they came for his people where he was from. And then my father said, I'm going to have to leave, because he was called off after 36 hours, and they had looked for him all over the place, and he went to, we had 2 cousins, 2 women that lived together, and there was no men there, so he went there for a couple of days, so in case they looked for him, otherwise they wouldn't find him, and that's what happened, and he survived. And then my father said, I'm going to have to leave. And we said, how are you going to leave? He said, I'll think of something. And he and I, my mother was kind of hysterical, so he and I made out the language between us. And we had phones, and he and this other, the young man that was with us in the store said, please take me with you. And they took my little doll's cases, and in it they put a shirt and a shaving thing. And they went to a railroad station in Vienna, and they got on a train going to Rotterdam, Holland. And he saw a waiter he liked, and he said to him, I have some money to give you if you hide my friend and me. And he looked at him and he said, okay. And he put him under the table with white tablecloths over them. And they stopped at the border, and they searched the train, and what they found were the two little suitcases, and nobody claimed them. So they searched again, and all the waiters lined up in front of that table, and they didn't find them. Another miracle. They wound up in Belgium, actually in Holland first, and my father said to the young man, get off the train, light a cigarette, and act like you're getting back on. They'll be thinking we're just stepping out for a while. And then go through the streets of Rotterdam, and when you see a Hebrew sign, go in, maybe they'll help us. And that's what they did. They found out that in Belgium you've got to get 30-day permits, that's all to stay. And these people send them there, actually, with false papers. And they wound up in Antwerp, Belgium. My father called me and told me what to do. And he had the time that this waiter was on. And my mother and I packed up and sent it all to him in Belgium. And we got on the train, and I found the waiter. I remember, I can see myself with the menu in front of me, calling him over and saying to him, you promised my father that you would help my mother and me. Please, I have twice the money for you. He said to me, don't speak to me, I'm being watched, and that was it. So here we had to get out of the border again. And we've done in the German border. Now my German is Viennese, like Fink Schwarzenegger. He was from Austria. But it was the same German with a different accent, like English and American English. So every time I opened my mouth, they knew I wasn't from there. We had no ration cards. Everything was rationed. When we got off the train, there were other people like us, and one of them had gotten a telegram that you could stay under the eaves of an hourly hotel, and that's where we went. My mother was hysterical because the waiter liked me. I was a young girl. I had no protection. And nothing happened. Another miracle. A real miracle. I had no protection. But we stayed there, and they had people come there to make money to smuggle people out of the country. And we learned that only by not being able to be under the table with this waiter. We found somebody to tell us that. And there must have been about 12, 15 of us trying to get out of the country. So we stayed there, and people came, and they took about 5 or 6 every night, or 7. It was February, ice and snow, and they paid off the German border people who searched us everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I don't want to say where, but everywhere. And then we would start walking in the ice and snow, and when we heard a car coming, we'd throw ourselves in the ditch, and we did that for 7 weeks. And my mother got very ill with flu. It was ice cold, and then one time we made it all the way to no man's land, and I had to go to the bathroom, and it was surrounded by German soldiers, and I didn't know what to do. It was one of the moments in life you don't forget. I was so unhappy. But all of a sudden I got a note from one of them that he was in love with me, and he wanted to go wherever I go. I I should let him know and he would follow me. And of course I was scared to death to have anybody find that on me. It was on the no man's land. We were supposed to get cars to take us from there to Belgium. And of course the police came and sent us all the way back again. And that's how we spent 7 weeks doing this. And my mother had a high fever, and yet we went, and I remember having a gun in my ribs in the ditch at night. When I talk about it, I can almost feel it, so long ago. It's hard to imagine something like that. And you have no questions? You're the only one? Have another one. I want to know what you want to know. Yes?
What was no man's land?
No man's land was between two countries. They kept it open like, and once you got into no man's land, you could get maybe on the other side. But they paid off the Germans, but not the Belgians. So after we tried it probably 7, 8, 9 times and were caught each time, and each time they took the men away that were with us, and each time we had to go find a place to stay. And after that, my father was in Belgium already, and he found a man who had a brother in Germany doing this. And he wanted money outside the country, and my father said, you bring him and I'll pay you. And he sent him to us. And he actually got us out. It was a harrowing thing. We drove without lights for I don't know how long after we walked for miles. I even walked through a tunnel. And I knew if the train came, we wouldn't be here anymore. And then we finally made it, but it wasn't easy. And that wasn't the end of it. Belgium only gave 30-day permits to stay. And every 30 days I had to go get a new permit. They sent me in because I was a teenager and they thought they would respond to me better. We tried to get to other places, and there was a Chilean embassy, and we heard through the grapevine that the Chilean ambassador was out of town, and the vice consul was making money selling visas, and we immediately went with our passports. We got the visas. Our trunks, well, not trunks, but suitcases went aboard a ship. We booked passage. We got money from other relatives in other countries who were still alright. And the consul came back that night. He rang our doorbell at midnight. I remember they had these mirrors to the door, and I saw the flag of Chile. And he canceled our visas, and I still had those passports which they canceled visas. They took our luggage off. The ship sank, 600 people drowned. Another miracle. So then we went to the American consulate, and they said we had to have guarantees that we wouldn't be taking money from the government in America. My mother and I were born in Vienna, and my father was born in Krakow, Poland. It was different quotas. And the American consul, whose name was Leroy, which means honor, who was killed in the war by Mom, he liked me, and he said, I believe you worked. And he was very nice, and I had cold hands, and he warmed them for me. And he gave my mother and me a visa. My parents wanted to save me, and my mother and I left Europe for America, but my father couldn't. He said the first American visa he would get would go to my father. That was in February. In May, I think, I looked at, there was a knock on my door in New York. We were in New York, my mother and I. We started working immediately on our deed. It was either or. And that's why I couldn't go back to school. And I still miss it. I really do. We are self-educated, sort of. We learned with our children, I should say. My children have a lot of degrees, and we really did with them. And but when I got to New York, we had a $3 a week room with the family, and the cat used the bathtub for its bathroom. It wasn't easy, but we were happy to be there. And I had friends that had already gotten there, and I got a job the first day, pinning things on hats, and she wouldn't pay me after a week, so I went and got another job. And I did piecework when they made clothes and whatever it took. We ate. My mother had a terrible job. She cut out things from the war, from uniforms full of blood. She had to cut out the buttons and zippers and whatever. But we ate. And my father, all of a sudden, there was a knock on the door, and I looked out, and there was a Western Union boy with I forgot to tell you, Hitler walked into Belgium, and we didn't hear from my father for months. He was put in a cattle car, standing up, and for 2 days or 3 days, and most of them died, but he lived, and they let him out in the Spanish desert, and he said he was a cook. He was a good cook, and he escaped from there and made it to Marseille, and he was saved by the women of Jews. They saved a lot of people. They saved all the good artists that were Jewish of Europe. If ever anybody lived with those artists, they saved them. And they saved my father, and another miracle. And I was working for a man in the city of New York who was Jewish, and I went to him and asked him to help me, and he did. He sent his lawyer to Washington, and my father came. He lived to be 87. And that is my story. It is full of miracles. I don't know why, but it was. My parents were saved. My in-laws were saved by miracles. When my husband went to the American consulate, because a year before Hitler, 1 year before, we didn't even know of a Hitler. My husband's parents and my parents had taken a house in the country near Vienna, and the men went back and forth, and the women and children stayed, and that's where we met. And I was 14, he was 17. He already was working and going to school at night, because he always wanted to work. And I didn't know how it was, but he stood in line at the American consulate because a year before Hitler, he was dancing in Vienna, and he saw a table of 5 American girls with a woman. Even they who were graduating college had to have somebody to take care of them. And he went over and asked one of them to dance. He didn't know any English, he didn't know any German. And the woman with them looked him over, and he said he clicked his heels. He was 17, they were 23, and he picked one of them and said, "May I dance with her?" And she looked him over and said yes. So they danced, but they couldn't speak. So he went back to the table and asked the woman he could take her for a walk the next day. And she said, we're leaving at 12. So they met around 10, and he had a little vocabulary, and he spoke to her through that. And all his papers are now at a museum in New York, and they just had a fundraiser honoring my husband with 450 people. It was fantastic. And all his papers are there that I have saved through the years. And that book was part of it. His letter to, a year later, Hitler marched into Austria. He had that girl's name and address. And he called me that day and he said, do you remember, I told you I met these American girls. And I said, good luck and good weather. I thought it was ridiculous a year later. And I wasn't too pleased anyway, you know. And he said, I wrote it today. I found her address. I asked her to help me come to the United States. Her name was Mary Mills, Mills Avenue, Greenville, South Carolina. She took that letter, and her father knew this man, Shep Saltzman, who had a big wing shirt company in Greenville. And he made a date with him, and they went to see him. He wrote a letter, which is also at the museum, that said, if she, a Christian, wants to help, how can I do not help? He sent him papers. He was one of the first people I knew that got legitimate papers to come to the United States. And while he was at it, he went to the American consulate and with his mother and his sister, who also went with him. But his mother and the woman he picked to speak to at the American consulate, there were lines everywhere. You stood in line for everything when you wanted to leave. And he said to his mother, I like this woman over there, that's where I want to go. And this woman looked him over and said, are your parents going with you? And he was so taken aback for her to say that he said, they're going to follow me as soon as they get their things in order. And after he was here, I think 4 months, they got a call, they had a visa for the United States. We have no idea how that happened. Another big miracle. And that's how we got here. But Mary Mills, who did this with Shep Saltzman, was a lovely, lovely lady. I'm still in touch with her daughter, who is an Episcopal priest. And she did the prayer for the statue on Main Street. And I'm in touch with her. The others had all died. Her husband-to-be, she was engaged when she came to Vienna. And her husband-to-be never thought there was more to this story. They just hardly met, really. And it was one of those things that she did, and we never forgot it. And that's how he came to Greenville. And that's when I got to New York. He surprised me when I got a telegram that my father was alive after 6 months, when I didn't know that he was. He was there. He came by train to surprise me. We couldn't afford telephone calls, but he used to write me letters by parcel post. I thought he was crazy, wanted to get married. But he was the only one for me. No more? Yes.
Actually, I have a couple of questions.
Good.
But, so what year did you and your mother arrive in New York?
You know, I've been debating on that myself, but it was, I think it was 1940, during the war. Our ship had to dodge all the sunken ships and and there were many bombs floating around, and we didn't go at night because of that. But it was very stormy, and they took many people off on ambulances when we got here.
How long was the journey?
Huh?
Were you on a military ship or a civilian ship?
No. Yeah, it wasn't a Dutch ship.
Dutch ship.
Yeah, it's small and not small. I mean, small like now.
So did
My
you have,
daughter's on one today that's 4,000 people. So, you know.
did you have to pay a fare on that ship? Did you have to buy a ticket on that ship?
Oh yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, of course. And my father came too, and that's why it was full of miracles, including my husband's miracle. I guess we were meant to be here or something. And when I came, I was telling this to my nice man here, when I came the first time to visit Greenville from first the big city of Vienna and then the big city of New York, where I was a year and a half. He picked us up, my mother and me, at the railroad station, and he drove and he drove and he drove, and we finally got to his mother's house. And going back, it took about a minute and a half. He wanted me to think I was coming to a big city. And if you had seen Greenville in 1942, you wouldn't believe it. What else would you like to know? Yes.
Yes, your father was in business actually in Vienna. You said he had two shops.
Excuse me?
Your father was in business in Vienna
Yes.
before all this, terrible
Yes.
situation started. Now, after the war, was there any restitution? You said they took his vehicle initially, his automobile.
I get a monthly check.
I mean, was there any restitution to your father from the Austrian overturning?
No, but they send us a thing of what all they took, and every spool of thread was on there. There was no restitution. I did because I had no schooling. Not much, but
Yeah, there was some restitution.
not enough of what we went through. Yeah. And what else? You must have other questions. Yes.
What would you say would be the biggest lesson that you took from that experience? How it affected the
Just
course of-
love, don't they? And that's the whole thing. I mean, if you're nice to people, you will see they're nice to you. It really works. I don't understand what happened in Germany. I don't, because they were the most educated, the most read, the most everything, and too many followed. And those that didn't follow got killed too. So he played it all ways. So it's hard to imagine something like that. And did you learn something, young man there? Would you like to know something else that I didn't tell? No? Did you learn that I said you must love and not hate and never bully? Because they were bullies. And you know what came out of them? Nothing good. Not one good thing came out of Hitler. Not one. You cannot say one thing that was good. So you must love and not hate. Yes? And yes.
In 42, when you got to Greenville, what kind of employment did you or your husband enter into?
Well, my husband started the man that brought him here had a shirt factory. His name was Chef Salzman. He had a big factory. And he started sweeping floors. He didn't speak any English. But he started to read business letters. He listened to the radio. And he learned very fast. And he told this man he was forever grateful for what he did, but the only time he'd leave him if he went in business for himself, and that's exactly what he did. And he had his own factories.
How were you treated when you came to Greenville?
Well, frankly, I wasn't treated so good because I took away a man that they all He took me to New Year's party when I visited, and he had to take me out. I was crying because, I was 19, and they didn't treat me nice because they didn't want me. There were a lot of nice young women after. He was a big flirt. That was a good question. I don't want you to be sad now, I have had a wonderful life, really wonderful. I had the most wonderful husband for 69 years. Nobody could ask for more. And and our children are fantastic. We did good. And I now have these 18 great-grandchildren, I can't believe. It was 17 and one on the way. I can't believe it because I'm an only child. I have all these kids. I just saw 35 of them in New York together, and that was fantastic. And I can still do it, which is good. Yeah. And I don't know what else to tell you besides that what I want the kids to know is to love and not hate and not bully. Yes?
Have you ever gone back to visit?
Yes. We took our children to show where we're from and decided to tell them that we don't understand their language, but we do. We're raised there. And they don't like Americans. They think we're spoiled and we're rich, and they would sing it to each other. I had a very hard time. The only thing I ever missed was the music or the food, nothing else. And I just heard from somebody that went, it's still the same way. They just think Americans are rich and spoiled.
Is that in Vienna?
Huh?
Is that in Austria?
Yeah, Austria, yeah. I had a hard time, and I did it by age, If they were younger than me, fine. There are a lot of them who really are sorry of what happened. Some of them went to work and, for causes. And when we traveled for South Carolina, we traveled the world. In Germany especially, all the big companies, we visited was the biggest companies, and all their children have a guild and go to Israel to help out. It was amazing, yeah. And that was nice to know.
How many of your relatives did you lose in the Hillers and the
90.
concentration camps?
Yeah, we lost 90 people.
90.
Yeah. It's a number you can't even imagine. Well, this has been wonderful. If you have no more questions, I have to go back to Greenville. Yes?
What do you think would help prevent something like this from happening again?
Love. I don't know. I mean, what is there? What can there be? All I know is that the Nazis have never done anything that's good. So why do it? Unfortunately, there are Holocausts right now, but not 11 million. But one is too much as far as I'm concerned. But there are people, I don't know what is on their mind, like ISIS. I mean, how do you explain that even? Where does this come from? The only thing I worry about myself is, can it happen to good people? Can we all go mad like that? I hope not. And that's why I keep saying love and don't hate. If you love, it can't happen. So if somebody is, I have tried it, like if somebody doesn't feel right and says blah, 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 or something, and I'm very nice to them, all of a sudden they will answer you nicely. And then you can do that, try it. It's fun to try that. My children do it all the time. And they call me and say, "Daddy, didn't I go today?" It works. Well, thank you for being here. And